Hi, I'm Josh. Thanks for clicking on this video. What you're about to watch is a recording from a talk I gave at the Unity NYC event about a week ago. It covers a myriad of different topics that I had been thinking about, and I had a really fun time making it and a really awesome time volunteering to give the talk and meet everybody. So it was really cool to come out with that. There are a few points in this talk where the audio clips, so I've tried to edit that out and make it more comfortable to watch. Other than that, there are a few edits that I've made to sort of the structure of the talk. There's one thing that I have taken out based off of previous announcements and different changes to the game. Other than that, the source code for Godwalker is still free, so you can check that out. There's a link to that in the description below. The Discord server is also open, and I'm very open to connecting with anybody who has any questions. Other than that, the QA is kind of hard to hear, so I do repeat the questions right before or right after they are asked. So other than that, without further ado, please enjoy the video. I hope the edit was okay. A few things had a few problems here and there, so thanks so much. I hope you enjoy it.
I have a really dumb, playful thing that I would like to try because I've never had command of a group of like a room this large. But could everybody do me a favor? And on the count of three, can we all crack our knuckles at the same time? Just for fun. I just want to see how it sounds. So like on three. So 1, 2, 3. So 3, 2, 1, go. I guess on go, right? So can we just do? I just want to hear. Like, are you guys ready? I mean, if you shouldn't crack your knuckles if you don't want to, right? All right. So on go. All right. 3, 2, 1, go. That wasn't as like climactic as I thought it would be. It's like a timing thing, but okay. Now that we all haven't had an intimate moment together and have enjoyed the space as one another, I'm Josh. Thank you all for coming. Today we're going to be talking about the Doom games and how much fun they are and how much fun learning is in games. And I was going to name this talk something dumb and academic, but then I named it "Learning is Fun, Doom is Fun, Learning While Doom is Funner." This is going to be recorded and put on YouTube. I'm going to go back over it and make some notes, and I'll also turn it into a blog post if that's more your speed, so you can read it on your own time. Before we get started, there are a few content warnings. So there's going to be violence. It's about shooting stuff and killing things. There's going to be gore from Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. So if that's uncomfortable to you, no frets at all if you want to take a step out. There's going to be guns and weaponry. So again, just making sure. There's going to be lots of flashing lights and imagery. So is that sensitive to anybody? All good? All right, let's get going. So what are we talking about? We're going to talk about how we learn when we play Doom. There's two major concepts that we're going to be covering. One of them is orthogonal unit differentiation, which has been thrown around in a lot of different games. Sometimes it's in like SimCity, and other times it's in combat. And there's a lot of different types of ways that you can use it. The other one is actuated diversification of play, which is a fun way of saying letting the player do other things. And that's something that I'm trying to sort of coin as like a phrase because I couldn't find anything specifically on it, but we'll talk more about it. We're going to talk about failures and successes of these concepts. And then we're going to talk about how I apply these methodologies to my games and like, some examples of what I've done. So we're constantly learning when we're playing, right? Like humans themselves, we like to fuck around, we like to find out, right? In Portal, if you shoot a portal at the wall and then you go through the portal, you're going to come out the other end and realize how that works, right? If you throw a chicken at something in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild or any Zelda game, if you damage a chicken, it's going to attack you with a bunch of other chickens. These are things that we learn by messing around in games, right? The best example of this, players are self-motivated, they're self-directed, like andragogy, right? The concept of adult learning, right? So if you leave someone in a room with a button and a box to open a door, they will eventually put the button on the box and open the door, right? Like that's just human ingenuity. So how far does that go? The original Doom game is a really interesting example of this because it's the first time that we see it at scale, right? So the first Doom game is this tiny little zone. It's really small. You can beat it in like 3 minutes. And the last one is this huge complex map that is just confusing and strange to navigate with tons of different enemies and items and keys. This concept is basically built on top of one another. There's no tutorial in this game, right? The first level of Doom teaches you that the goal is to get to the exit. That's how you win. The second one teaches you that you need keys, right? You need to find a key to open the door so you can get through it. So there's constantly new obstacles and tools being added to play. So you get different guns, and you get different keys, and you get different kinds of power-ups, and different kinds of health and armor, and all this different stuff that does different things, right? And you can explore the maps and find different things in there as well. and more of those elements come together to create scaffolding. So for example, if you understand how that guy on the far left, the imp, works, he shoots projectiles that are slow moving, right? Then you also understand how the big like devils work, where they've got a lot of health and they move really slowly. And you understand how the shotgun guys work, where they move laterally and you constantly have to get around them. You'll understand that when you look at this big guy with horns on his head holding a weapon, that he's going to do all of those things, but it doesn't have to be explained, right? This is very, very simple, and it can go as far as you want. So how are these actually organized? This is the first topic that we're kind of talking about, of orthogonal unit differentiation, is when units in a game can be described by actions, abilities, characteristics that are orthogonal to one another regarding functionality, so numerically different. How are we tracking these? So I've created a little chart where on the y-axis we have endurance, and on the x-axis we have aggression. So endurance is like how much health does this enemy have, right? How much of a stun chance is there when we shoot it with a gun, right? Because the enemies will go, ah, you hit me. Aggression is how fast they move and how much they attack and how much damage they deal. So if you look, there's the guys all the way in the bottom left. They're the easiest guys. They're not very aggressive and they don't have a lot of endurance. They're just there to teach you basically how to shoot them. But all the way on the bottom right, we have these skulls, which they see you and then they go, ah, and they charge you and they hit you and they do a lot of damage. But they don't have that much health, right? And on the other end, you have sort of the spider crab boss who has a lot of health, but isn't very aggressive. It's just a combat that you have to get really good at fighting. Then all the way at the top right, the actual name in Doom, the 1993 Doom game of that imp is the annoying imp, because he has a lot of health and he shoots a lot of different stuff at you. It's really annoying. So once we have these units and we've defined them, we can start to think more about how we're arranging them, right? So these are 4 different quadrants of different enemies that we can have in different arrangements that we can place throughout our game. So we have like our low endurance, low aggression, and that's an inherently easy combat. On the bottom right, we have like a higher aggression but lower endurance, so that combat might be more movement focused. Top left is all about high endurance and low aggression, so it's a longer combat, which makes it more risky if the player engages with it. And then finally, we just have this is just hell. It's like high endurance and high aggression is the most difficult. It's a long-term engagement. It's easiest to fail. So if you notice, you'll probably think like, okay, difficulty go up, number get bigger. We do stocks here, right? And that's all well and good, but if we go into this and we look at these different quadrants of how these different things work, and you sort of plot all of your different counters for a level on a map, what you're kind of starting to see here is like, okay, we're building this linear path. And if you do that, the problem is that the player's not actually going to learn anything new. They're going to be doing the same actions over and over repeatedly, and it's not going to be diverse, and you're going to get bored, right? We like to learn new things. We can learn a lot really quick. Humans are amazing, but it gets really boring if you're just repeating the same task over and over. So you can kind of imagine how this level flows. You have like the first area that's super easy, right? It's the easiest possible thing. The second area is just a little bit harder. The third area is a little bit harder. The fourth is really getting there. We're crossing the threshold of the center of the graph. And then 5 and 6 are just difficult, right? Like you'll die when you get there and you have to reload your save. That's annoying. That's boring. And that's not bad, right? That's not a bad thing if enemies are simply just getting more and more health and more endurance. There is an entire genre of games that is dedicated to enemies that simply have more health, and that is looter shooters, right? If anybody has played a looter shooter, you know that the whole point of that game is you fight bosses to get a better weapon so that you can kill bosses so you can get a better weapon. And that is a whole genre of itself, right? And that doesn't make it bad. But in the case of what we're talking about, the reward in classic shooters for completing combat is new combat, right? That's why we like the game. That's why we're here. We want to learn something new. We want to engage with a really cool enemy and fight them and have a really awesome battle. So we're going to go back to this. We're going to look at this again. We're going to go back to this chart and we're going to randomize it a little bit, and you'll start to see how you can start to apply this in your own work. So this is how we're going to do it. We're going to have this sort of Mod Podge, weird looking kind of thing of these, sort of randomized. I actually did just drag these and place them wherever I wanted. There was no thought put into this, but you'll see how very quickly we can start to see how that applies. So now when you walk through the level, we have what I'm calling actuated diversification of play, where the player has options, but is not forced to actually go through these, right? You can move around the enemies and fight them any way you want, but there's going to be the better way to engage with them. So for example, now we have a really easy combat. Then we have like some movement. We got to get the player moving. We got to teach them like you can't just stand there and shoot them. We go back to the center area and it's like a longer engagement, right? It's harder, so maybe they lose some health and they have to explore. We go up to number 4, it's a lot more movement, it's a lot more dangerous. Number 5 is really getting up there, but you're starting to employ all of the skills that you've had so far, right? Because you've experienced high levels of movement and high levels of endurance. Number 6 is just flat out like, this is the time to go crazy. You have to beat the game now, right? Learning new things is fun when we can figure them out and when we're constantly introducing to them, right? Or constantly introduced to them. It's not fun to do the same thing over and over. So we're going to talk about a comparison between Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. And in this space, it's basically just 4 different points that I discuss of like what I find to be good and bad in comparison to my own subjective opinion about what is good and bad about teaching people new things in games, right? So in Doom 2016, you're constantly seeing new mechanics, right? Each of those individual elements is fun to engage with on their own, right? Elements are introduced through exploration and there's no hand-holding, and exploration is safe. That's a big one. And enemies can be destroyed using any tool, so there's no better or worse playstyle. In Doom Eternal, a lot of things change, right? It really just explains mechanics to you. The individual elements actually impede play. Exploration often results in punishment, especially on higher difficulties, and enemies have weaknesses to specific weapons. And we'll go through each of these specifically now, one by one. So experiential learning is a really big concept for adult learners, and especially for people who are going to be the target audience for this. In Doom 2016, you have to figure out, right, on these giant guys, I think they're called the like munguses or something, like mungus imps, which is an awesome name, and I'm so glad they did that. But you can shoot those giant cannons that they have on their arms off. You can do that with grenades. You can do that with a sniper attachment. You can do that by actually like punching them really hard. There's lots of different ways to do it, and you can figure them out by play, right? You see this element and you engage with it. That's experiential. In Doom Eternal, they pause the combat. They put up a sign that says, here's everything you need to know about this enemy. And that's really boring. That's really sad. If I could turn them off, then I would, but you can't. And it's forced into your brain and you see it and they play a little video and it's ingrained in you and there's no more sense of discovery. There's no more sense of learning, which is why I got bored, right? And then there's some more stuff in here too, where they sort of skip, right? So in 2016's Doom, you have this really interesting mechanic where you can do challenges and optional sections that become increasingly complex. All right, so it's not required, but it is highly recommended. You get really cool bonuses, right? You get awesome runes that you can add to your player. You get more Praetor tokens. You can upgrade your weapons. There's stuff in there that you can really engage with. But in Doom Eternal, there are really weird individual elements that aren't fun and actually impede play because they are high-level rules without scaffolding. So if you remember that analogy that I made, or I guess the math that we did with the enemies, right? When you learn how one enemy works and another, harder enemies, you now understand, right? That's a concept in learning theory called scaffolding. So you can introduce an advanced concept from previously learned basic concepts. The Marauder is a hated enemy, right? When the game came out, it was trending on Twitter how bad this enemy was. Because everything else in Doom, if you shoot it, it dies. The Marauder requires you to wait until his eyes glow red just in the middle of an animation, and then you melee him, and then you can shoot him for about 3 or 4 seconds. People hate that because they get stuck on it, and there's no enemy previously who actually has that kind of engagement. Doom is not a game, it's like a fighting game mechanic in a way, right? It's very, very different from the kind of the gameplay style that you're going for. Then they also have this purple ooze, which doesn't let you jump and it doesn't let you dash and it slows you down. So again, that impedes play and it makes it less interesting and removes sort of this level of push forward combat and being an unstoppable killer that Doom is the fantasy of. There's also a really weird level of punishment for exploration in Doom Eternal. So in Doom 2016, you're encouraged to explore, you navigate through vents, you find your way through these crevices and cracks to collect like little figurines that are really cool, and you can find upgrades as well, and it's encouraged. And you can't really fall or die easily, right? If you fall and die, the very first time that they teach you how to double jump, you can actually try to double jump and then you fall onto a platform below. So they've designed it to teach you should be careful of falling. This is the first real platforming section in Doom Eternal when you're in sort of the like destroyed ruins of a Earth city or something. And it's really easy to fall. And especially on higher difficulties in Doom Eternal, if you are losing your armor and your HP just because you are trying to go somewhere and find something new, it really disincentivizes exploration. So that removes a huge aspect of sort of experiential play. And finally, the biggest thing to me, which is a huge, huge problem with this game, is that in 2016, any gun that you want, any tool that you want, basically everything that you can imagine that you would like to do to fight enemies, you can do that, right? Enemies have multiple weaknesses, like we discussed with the munguses, who you can break their stuff off with, the shotgun or the sniper or anything. But in Doom Eternal, while you can still technically kill everything with everything, there are some weaknesses that are simply significantly better than others, right? If you shoot the cacodemons with a grenade or you throw a grenade in their mouth, they will do this popping animation and then immediately you can kill them. Why on earth would you ever use any other weapon to kill them? And if you have to, it takes a long time. They have one of the highest health pools in the game for enemies, excluding bosses. So this is the difference between actuated diversification and forced diversification, where actuated diversification is saying, here are all your tools. Here is your problem. You can use these tools to solve the problem in the way that you think is best. Forced diversification says, here is the problem and here is the solution and here's a tooltip on how to do it, and don't explore and only engage with the enemies that we want you to. And I don't like that. So we're going to talk about a little bit of like how you can apply this to your own design, right? So we've talked a lot about how these elements of learning and experiential play apply to these big AAA games. But you can really do this with any game that you want, right? Take the time to sit down with your game in its current state, because I'm assuming most people have a game that they're working on. It can be a board game, it can be a digital game, whatever you want to do. And think about the variables, right? If it's a racing game, then what role does acceleration play, right? What role does braking play? If it's like a city builder, then what kinds of systems are you building with like the police stations or the fire stations, and how do they interact with one another? And identify that core variable, right? In the Doom example, I did like enemy speed and health and all this stuff, but you can really just start with like 2 and then see how different they are, right? And then think like, are your variables diverse enough to serve your gameplay? And this is where it gets really interesting, right? Like, if you have no ideas and you have gone into a rut, that probably means that you don't have enough variables to engage with your play. So for example, if the only kinds of weapons in Doom were weapons that could fire bullets one after another, then the only extremes that we would have are the pistol and the minigun. That's the only variable that we're really modifying. Once you have those variables too, you can start to create extremes, right? Like we have this tiny little shambler dude and this giant dude who has all these different things, and they both inherently do the same thing. They run at you and then they hit you, and that's really it. They have different amounts of health, they're larger, but they are the extremes within their variables, within their rule set. So analyze your space of play and try and do some extreme, intense differentiation. Then if you really get into a corner and you've outlined all of your different variables, start just fucking around. Like, it's like some of these are going to be good and some of these are going to be bad, right? The Marauder is a really interesting idea. It is the concept that you can't just burst your way through everything, right? That you have to be more precise. You have to be a trained killer, which is a really hard thing to employ in a game like Doom, where everything is coming at you all of the time. If you're going to do something like that, build your elements, build your scaffolding, and sort of build up to it. But it makes it really difficult for the player if you just suddenly introduce it, right? You can start to have individualized rules. So that GIF on the top right, where the guy is using the grappling hook, and then he flips to the minigun, there's 2 different individualized rules there, where the grappling hook lets you fling around the map, do all this really cool stuff, and get really high up, right? It's the thing in Doom Eternal that lets you get really up in the air. And then the minigun, right, has an upgrade where when you are holding it out and you're using the shield, you can actually hover and move down slowly. So this is a GIF from somebody on Reddit who is like, this is the coolest combo that I've done in this game, where I get really high up and then I just destroy everything from the sky, right? And also prototypes can just be like the BFG. Like the BFG is literally, it stands for the big fucking gun. That's it. And it's just a gun that kills anything. And you have like 5 shots with it, but it's cool, right? It's a prototype. You can mess around with it, test it and see what it works. But just be prepared that most of these ideas will be failures, right? They're not all going to succeed. And then reflect on it in your playtest. So we're going to talk about some of the stuff that I did for what is my graduate thesis, what it was. It's out now. You can play it. I'm going to do a playtest after if you're interested. But this is a game called Praetor. It was inspired by Doom. All the weapons felt the same. The combat was awkward. It was just weird. Nothing made you really engage with the enemies in an interesting way. There was a Borderlands 2 weapon generator that I made for some reason. Dying didn't really mean anything. It was just not interesting, and I couldn't really put my finger on it, even though this was about 2 years of work already, or about a year and a half. So I took a step back, and I kind of asked myself, what am I actually trying to do? And I started making enemies more different from one another, right? I put them onto more intensive extremes, which immediately, just from making enemies that fly and shoot you really quickly, causes you to move around them, right? It's a warning. It's like, oh no, like you're gonna kill me. And then messing with the arena, how waves are controlled, and doing extremes on all of the rules that I had, I was able to very quickly have this shooter that felt it was a lot tighter, it's a lot faster, right? It felt a lot more interesting. And then what I added another variable, right? Like healing before was just kind of like, oh, you'd find a health pickup and then you'd be done. But now healing is tied to kills, and dying is way easier. So you constantly have to kill things to stay alive. And how far did these variables take me? They took me all the way to a vertical slice. So right now in the demo, there's 34 unique weapons, right? There's dynamic combat arenas that change and modify themselves as you play. Enemies are more intelligent. They're more interesting to fight. It's not just you like punching away at them forever. And healing is now explicitly tied to killing enemies and playing fast. And the gimmick of this game is now the faster you play, the stronger you get, which is really interesting. So a specific example. So the fundamental rules of how this works are that weapons only reload in your backpack, right? So you can't actually just press R to put more ammo in the gun. You have to put it in your backpack and use all the weapons that you've picked up. And then over time, weapons become less effective at gaining your health back, right? At filling your God meter, right? But their damage remains the same. So the results of this were pretty cool, right? Players who were really, really good were able to just keep all their weapons, and they didn't care about the God meter because they didn't get hit. They just didn't get hit. They were just alive. And that's really funny if you think about it, that the game is about combat and they're just not getting hit. But for lower level players, there's this really interesting dynamic where they picked up every single weapon that they got, and it forced them to get better with every single weapon, which is actuated diversification. They're constantly doing experiential learning. So there were some challenges with this. I had to add some more variables to the weapons, and I still think that I do, but they all felt really similar. And the best weapons were just the snipers that had the most damage, because once you reached the highest level of your God meter, you had unlimited ammo, and you could just go boom, 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 boom with the sniper, and it's an arcade environment, right? This isn't like Call of Duty. This isn't slow. This is really fast. So what did I do? I just added a bunch of different stuff. I just made like explosive weapons, and I made grenade weapons and plasma and shotguns and all these different elements that I could tweak and mess with to get a more interesting kind of dynamic going. So, for example, you can also see that the meter builds in different ways. So shotguns are effective up close. They're not effective from far away. Explosives are even more effective if you hit multiple enemies. So now there's a whole other dynamic of play of like, oh my God, I just hit 3 enemies at once and my meter went all the way to the highest level. I'm going to try and do that again, right? And plasma is better in succession. So if you have a huge magazine of plasma shots, you want to hit all of them on the same target at once. So there's all these secret rules that the player is slowly learning as they play the game. So this was really, really cool. I started creating some really extremely weird weapons that players fell in love with, and that was awesome. But what was really cool about my telemetry and my playtest data was that nobody was using the same weapons, right? Each player had a wildly different playstyle. There were people who didn't understand how to, stick with the same weapons, and they always had to switch because they constantly needed that boost, right? But there were some people who would have negative effectiveness, so they weren't even using the meter at all, and when they used the weapon, it would take away from their meter, right? So it would be so hard to heal for them, but they still did it, which was just really, really cool, and people relied on things they were comfortable with. On the bottom there, that weapon on the bottom left is the most interesting weapon. It's the Fleet. It fires 3 shots at once. It has a really low damage per second. It has a very small magazine, but it has the highest effectiveness of any weapon. So it's the easiest to regenerate your meter and your health. Okay. What you have to learn is that this weapon is not for you to use when you're out of God mode, right? You only use it in God mode. You only use it when you have unlimited ammo, and it's hard to use. It's close range. But if you can get there and you can use that system and you can play with it, it's really cool. And somebody used it to beat my game in 3 minutes and 35 seconds or something. And that was just awesome. That's just really cool that can happen, right? So there's a quick video just of gameplay, and you can look at sort of a dynamic arena, and I don't want it to make noise, but This is sort of what the gameplay is like, right? Like you're constantly having to move through different weapons, and as you're playing, the arena starts to evolve, and it gets more intense. And rockets help you rocket jump, and different enemies have different behaviors, and you want to do different types of play, and you're constantly trying to like, oh, I've got my rifle out, I'm going to do mid-range, or I've got my rocket launcher, now I'm going to try and do like that, right? Where you're getting away from them and going to the next one. And there's like this consistent level of play that you have to engage with. Each weapon is orthogonally different from one another in an interesting way that makes play like really dynamic. So to conclude, games are at their best when we are constantly learning. The more that we explore as designers and players, the more we discover that we have to learn. Through games, we're constantly learning and growing. The constraints we as designers create are inherently those of educators for our players, and exploration is fundamental to self-guided learning. Games are a form of accessible education, and any unnecessary hindrance to the creation or consumption of play leads to destructive constraints on accessibility and equity. In other words, we hate Unity now. Thank you to the volunteers who took the time to set up the event. Can we get a round of applause for them really quick?
And also the lowercase as well.
Yeah, and thank you to the lowercase for hosting the event as well. That's really, really amazing. And thank you to all you guys for coming to my talk. This was really cool. It was a really amazing opportunity. Thank you to Paul. Thank you to everybody in the room as well who's part of it. I don't know how many people there really are. I think there's like 4 or 5 of you guys. But if you want to connect, you can do anything here. And yeah, feel free to reach out. I'd love to talk. I'd love to chat. I'll be here. I have my laptop. I'm going to show Godwalker. And thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
So if you guys, we have time for Q&A as well. If anyone has questions, please raise your hand. And
Hello, this is Josh in video editing mode. I've just paused the video at the very end, just before the QA. I'm going to do my best to just quickly say the question that was asked. There were 3 questions asked just before I answer them, just so that you can hear them a little bit more easily on the video. Okay, back to the QA.
One thing that surprised me in the demo, though, was that so when you were talking about actuation or diverse actuation of gameplay or whatever the term you were using was, I was surprised to see that in your game you force people to switch weapons.
I do.
And what surprised me about this is because it sounded like something you were criticizing Doom Eternal for. Now, it may just be that the difference is that your weapons are more interesting than just use damage types against different enemies. But I guess I was surprised to see that as a positive, given what you just said.
So the question that was just asked was, why do I force the player to change weapons in the demo?
Well, to be fair, I actually secretly don't like that you have to switch between them, and I've been trying to mess with mechanics that make it so that you don't have that constraint. But right now, as it stands, the reasoning for that is that it makes you play differently in different ways. But if you really want to, you can just switch back to your other weapon, right? There's nothing stopping you from doing that. But what it really does encourage is when you pick up weapons, there are 3 at a time, right? So you have the option to make a build that is really nice. But I think that's a constraint of gameplay that has to be there in some form, right? If it's not there, then you can just use whatever you want whenever you want, and you're playing the same thing over and over, which becomes that linear progression that we talked about too. So it's a challenge that I've been trying to pick apart and mess with. It's also the reason why there's 3 weapons and not unlimited weapons, right? It's really hard to get around. And I've been prototyping some interesting stuff, but I'm not going to say anything because then you'll get an assumption of what I'm trying to work on, and I'm not going to. Yeah, and spoilers too, but I hope, does that answer the question, I suppose? Okay, cool. And other questions too? Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew. Why do you think Doom Eternal had struggled with the gameplay?
This question was, why do I think that Doom Eternal struggled with the gameplay of the sequel compared to the original?
Leadership?
I think that Doom 2016 was really, really tight. I think there were a lot of really specific elements that they were messing with and tweaking that they got to a point where it was so small that they had to add in parkour, right? They had to slow the player down to make it more interesting. These are the natural progressions of these things. And I think that's really the problem with what happens when you have a group of people that I think the entire design team shifted. I remember I was reading the credits from Doom 2016 to Doom Eternal, But I imagine that the people who made, like, if you look at the fan maps for Doom 2016, there's an entire level creator in that game where you can make your own custom levels. I see you nodding as well. It's like, and there's like thousands of community made levels that are really cool and interesting. So I don't think that it was necessarily like, oh, we've reached the limit of what we could possibly do. I think it was just, we need to do something new. Otherwise, this is just going to be Doom 2016 again, if that makes sense.
And one more question, and then and everyone will have time to talk to John.
Yeah, I'll be here. I'm just like
running away, so.
Yeah, all the way in the back.
I'm just wondering if where one that you think is better, versus Doom Eternal.
Can you define better?
Yes.
Okay, so like something I'm wondering which one did you find more mechanically interesting, which one did you find more atmospheric?
And finally, this question was, which game do I find more mechanically interesting, and which game do I find more atmospherically interesting?
I think Doom 2016 for me was the peak of mechanically interesting because each of those systems themselves is inherently really simple, right? Like the entire mechanic of doing a glory kill where you kill a guy and then he's flashing and then you go and punch him and that's how you heal. That is such a simple system that is done in like 25 different ways across all the different enemies and bosses and all these different things. And it's used in like cinematic ways, right? And so they have a lot of these like really simple small mechanics that just do really big things. And I think that's really beautiful, right? Like a simple complex system in nature is like an ecosystem where everything is individually working and on its own, a very simple thing. But then when it comes together, it creates this really intense whole. I think atmospherically, I think Doom Eternal, of course, right? Because yeah, Doom 2016 for me, like all of the levels just kind of were the same. They were either on the Mars base where things were red or they were in hell where things were red, right? Like Doom Eternal, you have the Arctic, then you have like the ancient Slayer city, then you have hell, then you have Mars, and you have all these different places that you're going where it's constantly changing and it's more interesting. Even the Slayer's base is a really cool junction between levels that gives you sort of stopgap to say what is actually going on and who is, like there's just a giant mech that when you go down the elevator, you watch the mech in front of you, right? And you just see it. And it's like, wow, this universe is huge and I am a small part of it, but I'm killing everything and that's crazy, right? So atmospherically, I think Doom Eternal is more interesting to me. But yeah, cool. Well, thank you guys so much again. Thank you to everybody who set this up.
Okay, thank you so much for watching. I hope y'all appreciated it. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them below. I know this was a very long video, and I hope that it was informative. I did my best to match up the slides. The audio and the video were actually out of sync because I actually didn't have any video from the actual talk, so I had to actually go back and sort of re-record and replace all of the slides as images within the video editing software. So other than that, I hope that you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, again, please reach out. Happy to connect on Discord, LinkedIn, whatever works best. So thank you all so much for watching. And if you enjoy content like this, let me know, and I'd be happy to make more. I do have a few more talks uploaded if that's your speed and some devlogs from a while ago. But again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one, if there is a next one. And have a great day.